So what feels like 28 years after the original movie 28 Days Later came, here we are, it's 2025. We have 28 years later, the third film in the 28 Days Later trilogy, I guess you can say, and the start of a future trilogy. I'm hearing that in January, the Bone Collector or the Bone Temple or the Bone Pyramid is coming out. And now we're here with 28 years later, one of my most anticipated films of 2025. I was so excited to see this movie. The trailers were amazing. The trailers really had you thinking you were going into this very tense, zombie-filled, nightmare-fuelish world in which the world had been overtaken by rage monsters, aka zombies. To me, I'm gonna call them zombies, but they were people who were infected with the rage virus, as you saw in 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later. Now we have 28 years later. From the trailers, you get that Aaron Taylor Johnson and his son are out there going on to the mainland. I assumed it was like hunt for food. The premise of this movie is Aaron Taylor Johnson and his son are going out, and he's kind of taking his son through his first rite of passage in which he has to kill an infected to kind of make him a man. Now, I preface this by saying Aaron Taylor Johnson's son, Spike, is played by Alfie Williams. I think that's his name, Alfie Williams. And this kid is awesome, but in the movie he's 12. So I want you to think about that. A father, older gentleman, 30s, maybe even 40s, taking your 12-year-old son out there to kill zombies. That is the world we're living in. That is the world that Danny Boyle and Alex Garland are putting us in. And I was here for it, right? Once you go into the movie, it kind of makes sense. You know, you're making a man out of this young boy so he could become a productive member of this society. It shows in the trailer that each member of society has a specific role. And, you know, either you're a fisher, either you're a carpenter, either you're a seamstress, or you're a hunter. And they're training his son to be a hunter. In this world that we're dropped into, they're applauding this kid as he goes out. This is the moment of truth for this young man. And they tell him before he leaves the gates of this small secluded island, hey, if you go out there, nobody's coming out there to rescue you. If you come back, you come back. We know because of the way the infection works, once you get infected, it's rapid. It's not going to be a day. He's not going to come back and 2 days later, he's going to turn into a rage monster. He goes out there, him and his father come back, and then the movie turns into something else. Before we get into that, here we are. We always start with the highlights. And the highlights to me in this movie is the cast. We had Alfie Williams. We had Jodie Comer, who plays his mother, who plays a huge part in the second act of this movie. We have Ray Fiennes. We have Aaron Taylor Johnson. Those particular people within this cast are phenomenal. They're stellar. Alfie Williams in particular, this kid who in the second half and the third half really becomes the star of the movie. Aaron Taylor Johnson is all over the promo. He's all over everything. But once the movie actually starts, Alfie Williams, or at least in the second half, Alfie Williams really becomes the lead, which can be a little off-putting for the viewers, kind of like Last of Us Season 2. I'm looking at you. When Joel leaves, spoiler there, when Joel leaves and you got the Ellie and Abby show, do you really still want to watch this? And the answer for this movie is yes, because I was really intrigued to see where the story was going to go. And it went in some very interesting places. That's what I will say. But for the most part, at least given the script that they were given, this cast delivered, especially Ralph Fiennes and Jodie Comer, who are the emotional core of this movie. And they had some of the most emotional moments within this movie that were very subtle, very differently toned from every other portion of this franchise. This movie is a tonally different film from 28 Days Later, 28 Weeks Later. This is just something totally different. So going into this movie, you really need to expect that you're not going to get what you think you're going to get within this movie. Another real highlight really is Danny Boyle's direction. The movie is shot on an iPhone. I wish I had that skill to shoot anything on an iPhone. I've tried to do these reviews on iPhones and they look terrible. But the fact that he shot this multi-million-dollar film on iPhones, of course they were rigged up, whatever, but it's still an iPhone at the end of the day, whether it's a 15 Pro Max, whatever kind of iPhone it is, it's still a phone shooting a complete motion picture. And in some parts, you could tell they didn't have the greatest gear in the world, but at the same time, it still was fantastical. It was still a feat in itself to have shot this film using that type of technology that you can hold in your hand, technology that me and you can both own as the viewer. But that's kind of where the highlights end, right? Because me, you know me, I'm the most overly emotional movie reviewer. I have to be entrenched in a story. And this story was a bit of a mess. And that really leads me into the lowlights. The story itself was so all over the place. Once again, the trailers indicated that we were going to get one thing, and we ended up getting something totally different. And that's not always necessarily a bad thing, but going into this movie, I think it counts as a negative because of where the series was in the past, right? 28 Days Later, very dark, very seminal type film, very depressing, but it kept its core. It kept itself at being itself at its core. And then 28 Weeks Later was just kind of 28 Days Later, but ramped up times 10. And it was action, it was very adventurous, it was very gory, and it was just out of control, right? So I expected a mixture of the two, and I got a mixture of the two, but then I got a very slower paced movie than I expected. And as I said before, Alfie Williams becomes the lead midway through after the first act. He leaves his father and he becomes the lead. Him and his mother become the focal point of the movie, and it turns into a totally different movie. Then at some point, an event happens, and then it turns into a totally different movie. It's like a trilogy within itself. And speaking of trilogies, one of Hollywood's biggest flaws right now, or biggest sins right now, is instead of making concise individual movies, they're making setup movies for sequels. And sometimes that can work. For instance, Avengers Infinity War, right? We knew it was going to have a sequel, and that cliffhanger led us directly into the sequel. But at the same time, Infinity War didn't feel like a build up to a sequel. That felt like an individual movie, if that makes any sense. This movie, while it doesn't feel like it's a setup for the trilogy, the third act really does make it feel like it's a setup for a trilogy. And somewhere in the middle of the second act and the third act, it starts planting these seeds to let you know that we're in a bigger world and we're going to explore that bigger world in these future films at the expense of this movie, which made the movie a little too much. It wasn't non-cohesive because it did tell a very linear story, but at the same time there were so many different things going on, and not in a good way. It was very messy. It became an editor's nightmare. Like Danny Boyle, while his direction was great, some of his choices in editing were not so great. We kept cutting back to these old film footage, and I understood what they were trying to do. In that world, they kind of went back to the Stone Age. They kind of went back to medieval times. They using arrows and stuff like that. It kind of was trying to drive that point back, and they kept bringing in that Boots poem, and that worked in the trailer. But that didn't work when they kept cutting it in every 5 minutes of the first act of the movie. And it just stops. It does this thing where they show these red zombies, very visually unsettling. Why? I don't know. I assume we're going to dig into that in the second and third movie. But it just kept doing that in just these random spots that just didn't make any sense thematically. They didn't make any sense narratively. But I assume we're going to get to why those things were happening in some future installment. But for this movie, it didn't work for me. And it was definitely a negative, just some of the editing choices that Danny Boyle did. So the question I had as I left the theater, because I was very confused leaving the theater because it was not the movie I expected it to be. It was something totally different. My biggest question, and the question I always have for the Have You Seen That with T audience, is who is this movie for? Right? And this is a very tough question now. For this film, it's very hard to pinpoint who Danny Boyle made this movie for. There are some people who absolutely love this movie, and I think those are Danny Boyle fans. He does this in all of his movies. He tells you his movie is one thing, and it turns out to be something totally different, and that's fine. So for Danny Boyle fans, you're gonna love this movie. For zombie film lovers, you're gonna love this movie. We all know 28 Days Later reinvigorated the zombie genre, even though it technically isn't a zombie movie, but it reinvigorated the genre. And this movie doesn't do that. It doesn't bring the zombie genre back, but at the same time, it doesn't set it back either. So this movie is definitely for anybody who loves zombie movies. If you love zombie movies, you're probably going to love this movie. The people who are not going to love this movie is the people who don't like full frontal nudity. I have to warn you before going to see this movie, don't take any children to see this movie. For some reason, there is a lot of zombie penises and breasts all over this film. And it makes sense, right? 28 years later, these zombies are not wearing clothes. Their clothes are tattered because they've either ripped through it or whatever the case may be. But like these zombies are running around butt-ass naked. And it is very weird. It's very off-putting, especially the evolved zombie, the alpha, who's running around, dick swinging in the air all over the place. And they made sure that you knew that this guy was an alpha. Hey, yo, I'm sorry. I'm probably going to cut that out. Nope, going to keep that in there. But the alpha running around, just swinging, flapping in the wind, and no thanks. That was something that I didn't need. Once again, narratively, it makes sense, but at the same time, it's not something I needed to see. That's one thing. If you have small children, I heard they use prosthetics because, once again, Alfie Williams is playing a 12-year-old. He might be 12 or 13. So a grown man running around actually naked, or grown adults, women and children alike, which this movie had some of, which to me also a thing that doesn't make any sense is how are these infected people having kids? There were little kid zombies, little kid infected running around. Make that make sense. Once again, I'm assuming they're going to talk about it in the next film. I don't know if I want to see the next film. I'll be totally honest. So the question to you, my last question to you is, have you seen 28 Years Later? Did you like it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? There really is a huge discourse within the internet community, within the MovieTube community, on whether this is a masterpiece or a piece of S, right? There's a huge discourse, and there's really no in between. Nobody's in the middle like, you know what? This is a solid movie. Like, either people really like it or people really hate it. I feel like I might be one of the only people in the in-between, because I thought that it took some swings narratively that didn't really land or really didn't get over the wall. But this is a solid double, right? This is a stand-up double. This wasn't a triple. You probably could have legged it out to third base, but solid stand-up double. Good movie. Just not a great movie. I think the trailer sold us on something totally different because those trailers were so amazing. Sold us on something different. And at the end of the day, I don't think we got that. We did get a solid movie. We got some great performances. And once again, I hope you enjoy this video. I hope you like and subscribe to the Have You Seen That with T YouTube channel. And am I the only one who is tired of these movies setting up other movies within the movie? Like, they're announcing that their movie is going to be a franchise before it even comes out. Apparently the next two movies, or at least the next movie, has already been shot. 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, that's coming out in January of next year. That's a really quick turnaround. So I'm assuming they already shot it. If you shot it on an iPhone, it really doesn't take that much. And we've already seen portions of the Bone Temple in this film where Ray finds in this Temple of Skulls. I'm assuming that's the temple they're talking about. Would love to see where they're going to go with this, but at the same time, I might not want to see where they go with this, because if you stuck it out to the end of this, when you stick it out to the end of this movie, you are going to be shocked. Don't say I didn't warn you. It is something that happens at the end of that movie that's so jarring, that's so out of place. I literally started laughing out loud in the theater. I know I was the only one, and I could feel the WTFs behind me. It was like kind of like these gasps, like what is happening right now? I just started laughing because it was so outlandish. It was so out of left field. 28 years later, here we are. Danny Boyle, you son of a gun. You got me. But you'll always get me, Danny Boyle. I'm always going to go check out your movies because you're a good auteur. You're a great director. And Alex Garland, okay. I don't know what you're doing here. You are the writer of this. Don't know where you were going with it. But we'll see where you go in the second and third installment. I might see where you go on streaming. But until next time, I'll catch you later.